pleased and honored to have our guests with us today. Want to thank you all for joining us again for this virtual engagement. As we all know, our world is more virtual and digital than ever before. And this means that we're opening ourselves up to even more cyber threats than ever before. So today we've assembled this expert panel to highlight what you can do to protect yourself and your business. So we hope there will be a lot of takeaways for everybody today. Before we start, I just want to thank our presenting sponsor today, Mercury, powered by Secured Communications. We really appreciate all you all have done to make this program possible today. Also, just a couple of events I want to remind everybody about. We've got the Washington, D.C. fly-in coming up. That is September 20th through the 24th. You don't want to miss that. Also, this week on April 22nd, the Vegas Chamber is partnering with Hope for Prisoners and Workforce Connections on a virtual job fair. So check out vegaschamber.com for more information on that. And then, of course, Leadership Las Vegas is accepting applicants to that program. It's the most prestigious leadership program in Nevada. We definitely want you to take advantage of that. Now, I would like to introduce our guests and our panelists today. The CEO, and he's a tech expert, of course, with Secure Communications and Mercury, is Rob Wilson. Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We also have Mr. John Parkinson. He's the president and is also a global counterterrorism expert. John, thank you so much for being with us. And then we also have Mr. Ed Gibson. He's the Chief Security Officer and former Microsoft Cybersecurity Officer. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much for being with us. We know how important this topic is, and we're eager to learn all we can from you today. So with that, Rob Wilson, I will hand it over to you. Good morning.
Fantastic, Mary Beth, and thank you guys for allowing us to join you. I'd say aloha, but I'll start with this. I'm third generation Nevadan, so we're going to really talk about a little bit about giving back to Nevada and what we've done in Vegas and what we're doing in 5 countries. But this is really about Nevada giving back to Nevada. And I do live on an island, Kauai, so if you're on that side of the world, we can take care of you as well. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to share some screens, guys, really to support how important cybersecurity, some stats, and how it affects you personally. I'd also say John Parkinson here and Ed Gibson. Let me share my screen. So you see this okay, Mary Beth? Perfect. So this is a quick agenda, but I'm going to start with John Parkinson. John Parkinson, the president of Secure Communications, is in London. Thank you, John. I think it's 7 p.m. your time, so thank you. Appreciate it. John's background had roughly over 10,000 people working for him in the UK, as well as being a counterterrorism expert, intel expert, where governments come to really get his expertise. I'm so happy, John, to be part of this group and this topic. Ed Gibson, former FBI, many years, and then also Microsoft Chief Cybersecurity Officer throughout Europe. So very important, powerful group of talent around to take questions at the end. Background, I'm going to show a couple slides, guys, and kind of tell you my background. I often find people connect with people. So I want to share a few stories and where I started and why cybersecurity is so dear and near to myself, and also giving back to Nevada. John's going to handle current cybersecurity threats to businesses. And there again, this is how cybersecurity threats affect you in Vegas. So your global companies in Vegas as well, but we're going to really focus in on how these things affect you. And then Ed, we wanted to look at with Ed, what is the future? Here's today, but what's the future of where we're going? So just a little bit here, guys. Everything changed. So this is interesting. I was in Las Vegas, many times. I was there a couple weeks ago. I think Kauai. But last March, I think I went to the, I think it was in March, maybe end of February. I went to the Power of Love event by Larry Ruvo. Big event. And the following maybe 3 or 4 days, Vegas shut down. And it's unprecedented. And we don't know what the future offers and where it's going with security issues and communications. But looking at this, everything has changed. More work is being done remotely. Online collaboration, is the new form. People are working remotely. They're working at home. That's cybersecurity issues. They don't have firewalls and things in front of, their devices. A mobile device. as we start to travel, but it's still limited, how are you communicating and how are you sharing that information? And how are these new threats, emerging, going forward? This is the last slide for me, but I want to, kind of back up. I'm, again, third generation Nevadan, and I want to talk about how we're going to get back to Nevada at the end of this presentation and really give something special to you and everyone on this call. But, I graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno, a degree in accounting. I'm very fortunate and very blessed, I'd say, but I built up some companies in Silicon Valley. I've had a couple of Apple board members on my board. Did some things there. I moved to Midtown Manhattan, did a lot of things with some mega agencies back there, securing data and communications and marketing automation. Moved off to the island of Kauai. And on the island, it's not much to do. So we essentially, I bought a restaurant. And when I had the restaurant, we had 50 acres of wonderful property there, but it was about protecting privacy. And this is how I'm going to introduce secure communications. But sitting there with my business partner, we had celebrities, and we have no paparazzi rule and everything. But we wanted to make it, when you came there, you were protected. But we had an epiphany. How do you protect your privacy? How do you protect cybersecurity issues? At this time, North Korea hacked Sony. You remember 174,000 emails were taken from Sony, and it caused a really bad day. Edward Snowden took some things, and that story. So with this in mind, and why I tell this story is we had the premise of protecting your cybersecurity issues, your voice and your information and everything. How do you do that? Well, we went to Vegas. So we started with Vegas. So I can't say enough accolades about Joe Lombardo and the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. But we went to Joe and others, and we said, what type of communications are you using? What issues do you guys have? And with that solution that we gave the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, it kind of went worldwide. It went to throughout the United States, went into Canada, went into the UK, went into New Zealand and Australia. And from that, we circled ourselves with some really powerful people in cybersecurity, John Parkinson and Ed Gibson and many, many others around the company. So with that background, I'm going to hand it to John and talk about how it affects you. So we're all about the ability to communicate and give you what you need and protect your information, business information. So with that, Mr. John Parkinson, you got it.
Thanks, Rob, and thank you, Mary Beth, for the introduction. That's very kind of you, and I'm delighted to be talking to you here from London. What fantastic technology enables us to do. Just to build on what Rob has said, I just want to say that I've had over 40 years in a sort of technology and security background with the intelligence agencies and in law enforcement across the world, and I've never seen a time where cybersecurity risks are so high to businesses and to corporations, and the risks across a range of different issues are so big. And the remote working element that's been developed because of COVID, I think only adds to that. So I've been doing some research and having a look at some of the things about what's affecting CEOs. And a recent survey said that over 71% of global CEOs say that they're losing sleep over the fact that their company could be subject to a security breach if it hasn't already, and how would they cope with that, and what would that mean for them and their company. We've seen an enormous rise in breaches by victims, whether they're small companies, large companies, and individuals over the last 12 months. And some of that inevitably has been driven by the pandemic and remote working. We do understand that from an IT leaders and a chief information security perspective, they do feel that their organizations lack the necessary protections that exist, both for their staff and for how their staff need to function, but in terms of the way the business is developing and operating in exactly the way that we're communicating now. And less than half have said that they have what they would consider to be an effective cybersecurity strategy in place. And I think that's a really key thing to think about. And it's what it's doing, it's changing the dynamic with businesses requiring to allocate more and more funds into cybersecurity to protect their businesses, to make sure that they can continue and be productive. Next slide, Rob, please. So we touched on remote working already, and I think this graphic demonstrates really clearly what a spike we had during the sort of prime areas of the pandemic with remote working. But what's been really interesting is that businesses are telling us and individuals are telling us that they've learned new ways of working, and therefore we're not going to ever perhaps go back to the way that it was before COVID-19. What we've seen is a dramatic rise in the concept of BYOD, people bringing their own device to use as part of their business, their own smartphones, their own laptops, their own iPads, their own computers. They're finding their own technologies, webcams, and using their own domestic routers and firewalls to engage and connect to their company systems. So that has changed, and we're seeing it's probably doubled and will stay like that for the foreseeable future as we look forward. And the bring your own device issue has really had a challenge for businesses to secure their systems because of the plethora of different models, the plethora of different devices, and the general lack of education and training, but often that's in the awareness of the individuals. And see that, you know, we've now had something like 67–70% of people are saying they're now using their own devices as part of their daily work practices. As I said, whether that's a smartphone or a tablet or a phone. And yet companies, when we've looked at companies and businesses, their IT infrastructure has not kept pace and has not developed to support that new way of working. And each one of those kind of individual new ways of working is a vulnerability and a point of failure that the bad guys will exploit to hack into your systems, to exploit your data and to steal your information. Okay, Rob, next slide, please. And similarly, you know, we're all used to jetting around the world and visiting each other and having business meetings in nice conference rooms and in different facilities. But again, we see that that is probably going to change. More and more business is going to be conducted remotely, and that will include very serious business, large financial transactions, large discussions about mergers and acquisitions, about purchasing, about supply chain, about legal services, about HR, whatever it might be. Those in-person, very confidential meetings are now often going to need to be conducted remotely because we're seeing that business travel is going to reduce quite dramatically, particularly international travel, I think. And combine that with the climate change agenda, we're seeing, I think, even greater increases than the plus 50% that this survey suggests will change things. Next slide, Rob, please. One of the biggest threats I think most companies will experience at some point or another is ransomware. And I'm going to touch on what the big threats are, the sort of big four as we describe them. But this little graphic just gives you an example of the scale of this. So there was a study by IBM recently that showed that the average cost of a data breach globally was about $3.8 million. Imagine that's the average. That means some places have had sustained huge losses from their businesses, whilst the many smaller businesses, even a proportion of that would be incredibly damaging. And really interestingly, 2/3 of the companies across the United States have been affected in some way or another by a ransomware attack. And that is a really scary kind of figure. And I'm sure there'll be many in this audience that have been subject to it, whether they know it or not, in one form or another. So we've had done some particular work over here in the UK, because one of the areas that's been targeted is a sector that often operates in a supply chain mechanism to businesses, and that's the legal sector. Law firms who are providing legal services, legal advice. And we're saying that I think over 60% of law firms over here in the UK have been specifically targeted because they know this is where the money is, this is where the opportunity is in terms of damaging businesses, you know, at their most vulnerable, really, when they're discussing these high worth negotiations. Next slide, Rob, please. So the National Cybersecurity Center, and there's an equivalent in the US, have put together their sort of 10 steps to what a business should have in place that they should discuss with the board, for the board to oversee and to give credence to in terms of developing a capability. All too often, cybersecurity is seen by board members and by C-suite as being an IT issue. It's for the IT department, it's for the information security people, it's not really a business decision. Well, it's really a strategic risk for the whole company. And my view very strongly is that this is most certainly a C-suite issue. Because if you don't protect that highly sensitive client information, your whole business could be in jeopardy. And these 10 steps help to help board members and executives to ask the right questions of their staff and their organization to make sure that cybersecurity is in place. So a risk management group or a risk management strategy should incorporate a regime that really focuses on network security, user education of their employees and staff, having really secure configurations in the way that you operate, particularly in those concepts of remote working where bring your own device is ubiquitous. Have administrative controls for user privileges, so don't allow everybody to have the same levels of controls because that can create difficulties. Have close monitoring and have reporting mechanisms. So whatever kind of systems you use, whether it's for communications like our system or for other data transfer methods, you've got monitoring capabilities to understand when these things happen because a quick response could help. And have real good support for secure remote working. I think it's inevitable, and I've seen this certainly personally in many reviews at some of the most sensitive areas of business across the world, that staff will still use consumer level communications apps to talk to each other. They'll set up chat groups, they'll use social media to do that, and they will be talking about sensitive business data on those consumer level platforms. And it's simply not good practice. But actually, they do it often because CEOs and companies don't provide them with the correct tools to do their business. And so therefore, it's really important that they choose carefully when offering them the right equipment so they can conduct their business remotely. So I'm just going to move on now, Rob, to the next slide, please, and just talk about what are the current biggest threats. And these big four really are phishing, data breaches, ransomware, which we touched on earlier, and supply chain compromise. And any one of those can have quite substantial financial loss for a company, could decrease productivity quite substantially, often creates huge reputational risk, and I'll comment on some of the aspects of that afterwards. And increasingly now, both states and federal, and certainly here in the UK and Europe, legislation is increasing very heavy fines for those people that breach personal data. Many will have heard of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations in Europe and across the UK, being replicated in many parts of the world and being with a variance on it. And those can have really significant impacts on business. So let me just touch on a few little examples about some of what the individual threats look like and how some of those could be mitigated. So let's touch on Solarwinds. I mean, it's one of the most well-known and most recent events. Over 18,000 companies were affected by the Solarwinds hack. For those that don't know, it was a malware, a piece of infected software that was attached to security patches by the big companies that are involved in supplying software. So any software that's required to be downloaded and installed on your system was vulnerable to these updates of security patches carrying essentially this virus malware that was able to infiltrate and open doors to allow hackers access into your innermost parts of your network and security. Including it gained access to security tokens. So those think that they've got encrypted models, it was able to grab encryption tokens so they could decrypt and see the kind of content that you have because of the way that it was the architecture. A conservative estimate of the Solarwinds attack was it's cost businesses over $90 million just through that one event alone. And interestingly, we touch on the reputation. If you flip this coin and think of Solarwinds as a company, Solarwinds share price dropped by over 40% in a week because of the reputational damage that it was affected because it had this supply chain to many other businesses across the world. So in terms of phishing, the big threats that come with phishing, it's a type of sort of social engineering where attackers influence people, users of systems to do the wrong thing, to click in the wrong box, to select the wrong icon, or to, you know, choose an option that is not the one that they would like. And it's done very cleverly, and I'm sure many people will have had many email scams. It's probably where something like 80% of those kind of scams come from for phishing are emails that come into businesses that are mass mail shot with spam email. But what we're seeing now is a change, a move away from email and a move more into messaging platforms. People who are using messaging and collaborative tools. Some of the big companies have these collaborative meeting messaging platforms, and we're seeing more and more phishing attempts to come through there. It's a very low cost, relatively low tech way for cyber criminals to operate. And particularly, you know, going back to the pandemic, cyber criminals are no longer out there doing physical robberies. They're not robbing banks anymore. They're not doing holdups anymore. They're sitting at home learning these techniques to get into your business and to steal your money from the privacy of their own home or their own offices. They don't need to take those additional risks. The amount stolen has risen by, I think through phishing, has risen by over 300% in the last couple of years. And it's just seems to be an exponential rise in attacks. So one of my or a couple of top tips in terms of mitigation against phishing, make it difficult to start with for those hackers to reach your users in the first place. That can include firewalls, but it can also include having systems in place with administrative controls that people can't just directly sign into an application and reach anybody else that's on the platform. Education and awareness, I think, is something that we'll repeat throughout this webinar. I think Ed will touch on education and awareness of being a single big factor in protecting your business. And use protected communication systems. Whether we're just talking on the phone, whether we're sending messages, whether we're sharing files, all of that is communication. And if they're not protected, then they're all points of vulnerability for hackers to get into your system, and they will jump on the back of any of those communication channels to infect your systems and be able to draw data from that. The second biggest threat of the big four are data breaches. And the loss of client information could have a devastating impact. Just imagine all of your purchases, suppliers, all of your contact information being lost or being taken, or your loss of confidence by your customers because all of their data has been shared more widely. And, you know, some of the sectors that have that kind of client confidentiality at the heart of their business, like the financial sector, for example, like the legal sector again, is really, is really important for those. A recent example, 3 foreign nationals recently infiltrated the networks of 2 New York law firms to steal information about how they were dealing with 2 large businesses over a potential merger and acquisition deal that had been going on for some time, the negotiations. They were able to steal that information. They were able to use that information with potential a compromise with other investors, and the unlawful gains netted them over $4 million, and more importantly, potentially for those businesses, ruined the deal that then sort of crashed and burnt and wasn't able to proceed. So these threats, just to recap, cause huge disruption, loss of productivity, and companies should also be aware, and this is, sadly not an uncommon phenomena, of that sort of insider threat where, big disgruntled employees and others can use, without the proper controls, can leak information deliberately, and that can cause some problems. So mitigation, again, very similar kind of theme here. Manage security risks on personal data with administrative controls. Things like the ability to forward or download should be controlled by administrator level, not at individual user level. Protect personal data specifically against cyber attack, because it's the prize, it's the holy grail for the hacker. It's what gets them the greatest yield. Use proper encrypted transmission methods when moving data from one place to another, whether it's from one site to another, or whether it's from one agency to another, or from one business to another. and detect potential security incidents quickly through effective monitoring, because a quick response can often minimize and limit the damage that's occurred. Come back to the third big four now, ransomware, and we touched on that earlier, is probably one of the ones that most people on this webinar will have heard of and perhaps experienced themselves. Essentially, again, it's another piece of software, bad software, virus software, that prevents companies from accessing their own information, from accessing their own data from their own personal computers or their own network until a ransom has been paid. It's a very modern form of kidnapping, essentially, but this time we're not kidnapping people and we're not hiding people in locked garages. We're stealing data, we're putting big encryption over that data and preventing people from going about their business and conducting their business until they pay potentially huge sums to release that information. And we're not talking about real money anymore in terms of paying those. These transactions are often through Bitcoin and other kinds of virtual currencies, which enable the tracing ability for the law enforcement community to find these people is almost impossible. And of course, many companies feel that the easiest way to deal with ransomware is to pay the ransom and get back to business really quickly. The sad thing is, many of these are double scams, and people do pay these huge ransoms and still don't get a key back to release their information and nowhere to follow it up. And who then is going to report that to the authorities? The graphic in the middle of this slide is from the NotPetya. It was a pretty vivid attack where they were specifically asked for literally thousands and thousands of dollars to be transferred via Bitcoin to an untraceable .NET address, never really sort of resolved. You might have heard of another high-profile one, the WannaCry cyber incident back in 2017, 2018, affected over 200,000 computers, including one of our largest networks here in the UK of our health system. And it sort of highlights the indiscriminate nature of this attack. Email and increasingly messaging, again, is becoming the portal by which these kind of attacks, somewhere in the region of 80 to 90% of these attacks are through these communication channels. So whilst you might think your company might not be subject to a ransomware attack, they are often looking for those points of connection. So is it the lawyers, is it the finance, is it the supply chain that supports your business where they could intervene and deal with something? I'm not sure where that music's coming from, but it's not me.
Not me either, so.
Stop that.
Well, I wonder if they've just been Zoom bombed.
Somebody Zoom bombed us.
We'll see if we can take care of the technology on the back end. So sorry about that, guys.
We can fix that. We're here, Mary Beth.
Hello and welcome back to Apple Park for our first event of 2021. After the challenges of this past year,
maybe John, mute your side.
I'm not sure what's happening here.
As we move forward, we feel
not sure either,
that Apple continues to make a difference in people's lives.
I think Apple hacked Zoom. Here we go.
Our values.
Hey, John, can you mute for a second? Oh, there we go. It's gone.
Oh, that's good.
Wow.
Well.
But this shows the importance, guys. Even using Zoom or whatever product, it's how important it is for security. Imagine we're talking about business deals or something,
exactly.
and that somebody does that. It happened to I won't mention her name, but a board member at the Wynn Properties. She got Zoom bombed, and here she's a board member at Wynn, and she got Zoom bombed in California. And now look at the potential ramifications of being on a board level meeting. So
yeah, I can assure you that wasn't a plan from any of our side. That just happened. So I'm not quite sure how it happened, but it clearly did, and we'll look into that. But just coming back to the sort of ransomware, the mitigations against that are again very similar. Keep software up to date, make sure the security patches are in place, make sure you've got good control systems, administrative controls, and there's some good rules within your business about people understand what to do. And particularly, again, protect your people who are working remotely with bring your own devices, because these are the points of vulnerability that cyber attackers are now focusing on. So to provide an encrypted file messaging communication system to your employers will really limit your exposure to ransomware. And the final one, as I just sort of round up and summarize before I hand over to Ed, is around supply chain compromise. And that's really important, because whilst often many companies can look after their own internal systems really well, what they don't often realize is the companies they're dealing with who might be supplying software, equipment, communications, data, can also be another point of infiltration into their systems. So for example, we now know that many companies are looking to accredit those supply chain members to see what kind of communication systems, what kind of software they're using to ensure that it's working really well. And the greatest issue is a sort of a third-party supplier that fails to adequately secure that data. And many companies now outsource elements of their business, HR, financial, legal, we've touched on those already. And these are agencies that are often dealing with the most sensitive information of business and actually are now the biggest points of vulnerability potentially. So that position in the supply chain can really put a target on your back as a company for a cyber business. So, make sure that you have confidence in your third-party suppliers, particularly those that hold sensitive data, that they've got good controls in place, and that, if you've got really good security in terms of your communications or your data transfer, try and encourage those that you work with to have equal quality standards. So I'm going to finish now with a very quick sort of summary around those trends. And they tend to follow into sort of three areas, really. The trends around clients. They will need to continue to connect and collaborate through data rooms, deal rooms. They're going to be working with you more and more remotely. And competition for work increasingly based on meeting the security needs of clients. So often now businesses are losing tenders, are losing business opportunities because they don't have the security standards that the other business requires in terms of their interface. In terms of their staff, the growth in flexibility of workforce, use of contract and outsourced firms, the requirement to have information accessible anywhere, anytime, means a real big focus on the security of your communications. Delivering services, outsourcing to external suppliers, partially or entirely, and the use of automation where we're removing human factors, including things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, all provide opportunities for cyber threats if those are not locked down really well. So use systems where their origins are founded not in social and consumer use, but are designed for enterprise, business grade kind of things. They, in the UK, for example, and across Europe, the legislation now provides for 4% of annual revenue for a data breach by a company. And it maxes out at 20 million. That's a fine that nobody really needs or wants, and is completely avoidable by using good security, domestic security. And senior leaders, CEOs, C-suite members, they've got a responsibility to ensure that their members and staff in their organizations are provided with tools and equipment that give them the freedoms that all contemporary communications platforms enable them to have. Gives them the confidence of security, even when they're using their own personal devices. So they need to continue to talk, message, meet, chat, share files with the same flexibility that they've grown up with now, but using a system that safeguards their reputation, your reputation, and more importantly, your bottom line. Collaboration, I think tools are most likely to become more and more popular. Recent survey by Slack, one of the big collaborative tools in communications, says that they reckon between 3 to 5 years, email will be old technology and people will be using to messaging platforms as their primary form of communications. So in that process of the next 3 to 5 years, I would just advise that you pick the right one. Rob, over to you and over to Ed.
Well done, Ed. Or John, thank you, John. So Ed, there again, Ed, former FBI, Microsoft, and wonderful stories to share. So what we're going to look at now, guys, is the future of cybersecurity. And John, just a great segue. You just mentioned how email is going to be soon replaced, as we move forward. So what are the next things? So with that, Ed.
Next slide. There we go. Thank you, Rob and John and Mary Beth. Thank you. I noticed that there's a couple chat messages. Is that anything you want to raise right now?
Nope, I think that's internal. We're good to go, Ed.
All righty. Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to give a little background of myself, because why do you want to spend the next 10 minutes listening to me? Of course, my goal is that at the end of 10 minutes that you're not asking that very same question. So a little bit about me. I'm the Chief Cybersecurity Officer for Secure Communications, but 3 years military. And then I started my professional career as a lawyer for a major multinational manufacturing company. Then in 1985, my dream came true. I was appointed to the FBI as an FBI special agent. For the next 15 years, I investigated white-collar crime and anti-money laundering. And in 2000, I was selected to be an FBI assistant legal attaché, assigned to our flagship office, the American Embassy in London. There until mid-2005. And while there, I became known as Ed the Fed. Now, I don't know if that's to be meant as a compliment, but I took it as one. But I liked it better than simply being the cybersecurity guy. My responsibility at the embassy was to engage in FBI investigations that were spawned in the US, that involved US persons in the UK, and a very enjoyable and rewarding experience, particularly 9/11, post 9/11, where, as you all are familiar with, or at least I hope you're familiar with, and involving possible criminal activity. In mid-2005, I was asked by Microsoft to be its chief cybersecurity advisor. You might recall that in the mid-2000s, early 2000s, that Microsoft was having a lot of difficulty when it came to cybersecurity. And I was the first foreigner that the Microsoft UK office involved as their chief cybersecurity advisor. I was also their chief spokesman. And in my next 4.5 years at Microsoft, I gave over 250 presentations in 18 countries. From there, I returned back to the United States and spent the next 5 years working for 2 multinational consultancies working on cybersecurity. But what about you? What is the future of cybersecurity, and what are the emerging anticipated threats in the next 15 to 20 years? The future of cybersecurity, frankly, is here right now. When I was the chief cybersecurity advisor for Microsoft in the UK and Republic of Ireland, I remember giving a cyber presentation in 2005 to a large group of customers and partners about the grave threat of cyber breaches and scammers trying to gain control of computers and mobile phones through various forms of phishing, calls, text messages, and emails. At the time, the threats were largely coming from call centers in India. I knew from my time as an FBI assistant legal attaché assigned to the American Embassy that those who were calling from call centers, in many cases, were people that were being forced to scam people. They weren't there voluntarily. They were either forced to work at those call centers, or they wouldn't eat, or their families would be threatened. Some volunteered, of course, but the money was not very good. Recently, 16 years later, here in 2021, I read an article in a national news bulletin titled "Lessons from Inside the Fraud Factory." It cited an example of an individual, and I'm going to call him Jim, who received continual pop-ups on his computer saying his computer was on the verge of meltdown, and to prevent it, he should call the listed number immediately. I'm sure some of you have seen those pop-ups on your computer. So he called the number, and the person who picked up the phone said Jim needed to act now, or all the information on his computer would be deleted. But the person on the other end of the line could help. Just take a few moments with me, he said to Jim. And he calmly and slowly walked Jim through the process of allowing him to take control of his computer. He then told Jim that, oh golly, based on all the code problems and the viruses, that was going to cost him $900 to fix all the technical issues that existed on his computer. And this could be done by simply providing his credit card number, which Jim did. He was a little bit embarrassed at this time, but before all was said and done, Jim was taken for over $2,200. He was so embarrassed he didn't want to even talk to his friends about it. The only thing different from call centers 16 years earlier or 16 years later is that the scammers voluntarily worked at the call centers. The pressure to scam is intense, but now instead of being forced, because of the money that's involved, people are volunteering. Another variation of this example is a person who will receive an email advising the recipient. Let's call him Steve this time. He knows Steve has been looking at pornography, and unless Steve wanted a video clip of what he was watching on a split screen with Steve sent to all of his contacts, Steve could click on the link provided. What Steve didn't know is that the scammer was simply trying to get Steve to turn over control of his computer or mobile phone so that the scammer could have the ability to steal all of Steve's passwords and contact lists. In those 16 years from 2005 to the present, not much has changed. And I predict that in another 5 to 10 to 15 years, there will still be call centers, and they will continually get better and better. And as you and I get older and older, we're sometimes going to forget the necessity of cybersecurity and may in fact fall for one of those tricks. But what we can do, where there's money to be made, we all know that there will be people out there who want to take that money. And if they can do it using your computer or any kind of messaging service, they're going to do it. But I think one thing will change, the method of payment. Bitcoin, for example, now is up and coming. It was recently authorized by the Federal Reserve in the US. But sure, gift cards, money transmitters like Western Union and MoneyGram will still exist 10 to 15 years from now. I recall another quick story for you. While at Microsoft, I recall an elderly woman who walked into the office. She was there to claim her lottery winnings, her Microsoft lottery winnings. And having the ability, and as I was there in the office, I asked to speak to the lady, and she had just spent several £1,000s as admin fees, administrative fees, so that she could win her $1 million lottery. When I told her that there was no Microsoft lottery, she looked at me and said, yes, there is. It's been on my email. I've been talking to a person. And I told her, no, there wasn't. And even at that time, I knew that would it be worthwhile to inform law enforcement? And I did, but we knew that there was very little that could be done. The money that she had wire transferred was immediately gone. So how do we prevent such scams from affecting the company, affecting your company? Employee training and education. Education and employee training. But I have to tell you, sometimes even that doesn't work. Another example is when I was speaking to a CEO of a major company while at Microsoft. They were having a lot of difficulty with employees spending so much time on Facebook, and it was taking up their bandwidth. And after talking with the IT director and making a few suggestions, a little bit later, or a few weeks later, the IT director said, Ed, I need to talk to you. I said, what about? He said, well, something you had mentioned or suggested worked. Now, when someone spends more than 15 minutes on Facebook, there's a little pop-up that says, shouldn't you be working? Now, there's no personal intervention there, no intimidation, but you betcha the amount of bandwidth that was being used on Facebook dwindled dramatically. So sometimes it's more than education and training. Sometimes it's just a little reminder that shouldn't you be working? But training is the key, constant, as John mentioned, education. But we always know that some people simply won't listen because all I have to do is click on that link to win that iPad. Okay, so I've got to pay $25 and give my credit card number. So what? I want to win that iPad. But what's happening to you now? Until people really understand that if something is given to you for free, that likely means you are the product rather than the customer. Think Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Slack, Telegram, Instagram, and the like. Many of these pretend to offer end-to-end encryption services. However, these services are available to anyone who wants to sign up. And no, do not click on that link that promises a free iPad. Encryption is becoming a topic of many more conversations. I'm sure that you may have that inside your company. We know that various countries are looking at whether end-to-end encryption acts to prevent law enforcement from doing its job. Yes, we want to have privacy, but yes, law enforcement must be able to continue to do its work. We do not believe that such legislation will prevail across the board, but rather will be targeted legislation requiring companies to provide encryption keys when required by lawful legal process. As John mentioned, ransomware is and will continue to be a major problem, and you might ask why. Because it works. Companies pay a lot of money to get their data released. What we do not hear about anymore is redundancy. What about having servers backed up in another location? We don't even talk about that anymore because we just presume that that's being done. And I can tell you from experience, it's not being done. It's a disaster when data is not backed up. Ransomware, you pay that fine, you don't get your data back, and you don't have it backed up. Breaches, as John mentioned, are continuing problems. Companies fail to take and apply security updates. Microsoft, as we know, continues to provide second Tuesday updates. And for a long time, while I was with Microsoft, companies wouldn't accept the updates because they would say, but it's going to break my systems. But that's just not true anymore. There's a lot of coordination between antivirus companies and Microsoft as to when they release those security updates. We all heard about zero-day exploits. Things have to be coordinated. The company was breached and software that was provided, as we talked about on the Solarwinds hack. The company was breached, software was compromised, and several hundred client companies had been breached. We don't even talk about supply chain audits anymore. Why is that? We've forgotten about it. It was a big heyday in 2005, 2010, but we've got to get back on the ball. Auditing supply chain companies. Whoever is an HVAC company, for example, are they hooked into your system so they can maintain contact and know how your HVAC is working? Well, if they have an easy access that way, somebody can compromise the HVAC company, and get into your system. Individuals and companies must always be on guard. The criminal only needs to win once. You must win every time or be prepared for the breach. Preparation for that possibility is paramount. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ed. Yes, and I even learned more about your background at the beginning. That was well done, well done. A couple more slides, guys, and then just really get to it. I'll probably skip the video, Mary Beth, but we can send that out later to be sensitive of time. This is just a quote from me, but the security and privacy of business communications has never been more critical. I think through John's current events and Ed's future events, we could just see the risk and risk mitigation. You just can't assume it. You got to know that you are secured. So So that's our background. I'm going to skip the video there. This is something I really want to say just for chamber members only, and just to giving back to Nevada, where I started, and we're coming back to this, but for chamber members only, I want to give complimentary access. There's not, just use it. And everything we have here is that, everything that we're currently doing. There again, whether we were Zoom bombed or not, I don't know what happened earlier, but there's a platform, there's messaging, there's encrypted voice calls, file sharing, and so on here. And then we're going to, and this is basically what we're going to show you in a second, is Mercury Enterprise app that you can do all your calls one-to-one encrypted, messaging one-to-one, one-to-many to employees, encrypted files, encrypted platform collaboration. So this is yours to have. So two parts. This is the last slide, guys, and I'll turn it back to Mary Beth. But there again, for chamber members only, this is a complimentary access. Just a great gratitude back to the Vegas Chamber and our support for all the businesses in Las Vegas. If you have your cell phone, all you need to do is scan this, scan the code, and that will take you to a Mercury Enterprise app page for VIP access. And then simply input Vegas 1, no password required, but you're going to need that group ID to unlock the app. And this is roughly $360 a year per license, but we're complimentary. This is for members only and bringing you into this. So if everybody could just take a snapshot of this, and as we're doing this, Mary Beth, we can open up some Q&A.
Well, definitely, Rob. Thank you so much. And I'm going to do this myself. All right, got it. What a generous offer. Thank you for providing that to Vegas Chamber members. And John and Ed spoke so eloquently and talked a lot about education. And that's something that you do at Secured Communications, is you would come into a business and educate the employees on what are some of the pitfalls and what things they could be doing, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And so could they just go on to the Secured Communications website, or what's the best way for them to get started with that?
So we can do two things, Mary Beth. I mean, anyone on the call today can reach out to us for a larger, corporate needs for cybersecurity issues that you may have. But we're also, offering this. When you do download the app, put in Vegas 1, it'll create a one-way group. But Mary Beth and the chamber team can then send you security information. So the chamber now can reach out to you in real time. We're going to also add another group ID code that'll create a two-way communication, meaning you'll be able to communicate to John Parkinson and Ed Gibson in real time, and anyone joining that group will be able to see, because maybe it's great to share information. If something's happening on the north part of the strip versus the south part of the strip or different parts of Vegas, sharing cybersecurity issues or questions, and now you'll be able to join that broadcast group and be totally encrypted. So two parts, right? But for large companies, yeah, we have a team that can help, but I'd encourage everyone on the call today, after you download this, we're going to put a new code in here, and in real time, you'll be able to communicate back to John and Ed, and with issues that maybe you have that were brought up today.
Excellent. I love it. Well, thank you again for your generosity on that. We do have a question from the audience. Thomas raised his hand. Thomas, if you can unmute yourself, we'd love to get your question. Hi there. Oh, you're muted again, Thomas. Can you join us? Unmute your phone, please, or your computer. Well, that's okay. Thomas, if you can unmute, we'll take your question. But in the meantime, we are getting close to the end of our session today. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But another thing John mentioned a lot is about having a risk management strategy. And you talked a lot about phishing and things like that. And, at the Vegas Chamber, we've gotten more phishing attempts than ever, I would say, and hacks into our system. So we definitely need to work more closely with you guys at Secured Communications. But how do you recommend that a company even starts to build a risk management strategy?
John, do you have that one? Or you're on mute, buddy.
You got me now? Yeah?
Yep.
I'll take that. Thanks, Rob. I mean, I think the graphic that we showed, and obviously all of these slides will be available for those that want to look at them, those 10 steps around examining your network security with the professionals that exist undoubtedly in your own organizations about the way that your architecture is established to start with, then to look at the kind of platforms that you use, what is your user education in terms of the processes and procedures that you use, the fact that you have got good prevention from inbound attacks like malware, like firewalls, like using good antivirus, but also having good removable media controls, people being able to, put in USB sticks or other removable media that can infiltrate, networks directly into computers. And putting that kind of strategy into a single risk management regime that is constantly reviewed and is taken seriously at the sort of board level and at the C-suite level, I think will really, really help to improve security standards across businesses and across the industries in this area. And I think this is even more critical at the moment because of the remote working and because of people using their own devices. People are not going into the office and logging into a wired computer that's been on their desk for years. They're now logging in from a laptop, from home, on Wi-Fi, on domestic systems to connect into the business systems and still carrying out sensitive, transactions and information, or using it on their smartphones and other things. And that's where the big vulnerabilities will come.
Well, gentlemen, thank you all so much. Rob, do you have any closing comments? I just, again, really appreciate you all at Secured Communications and Mercury for educating us today. It really goes a long way in helping us protect ourselves more, which is more and more important, as you've pointed out. So, Rob, thank you again for bringing this team, Ed Gibson and John Parkinson.
No, thank you, Mary Beth. And they're again in being from Nevada and giving back to Nevada. And I'll be in Vegas next week, as a matter of fact. But just anyone on the call, just however we can help you. We are a global company, but a wonderful opportunity to meet everyone today. So thank you, Mary Beth.
Well, once again, thank you for sponsoring this event today, Mercury, powered by Secured Communications. Also, we want to thank our other webinar sponsors as well, SCE Federal Credit Union, Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber Schreck, and our friends at the UNLV Executive MBA program. Thank you all again so much. And please, for any questions that you might have, go to vegaschamber.com. And this webinar also will be on the Vegas Chamber's YouTube channel, and we will send it out on social media as well. So thank you all once again. Have a safe.
Hold on. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.